We are live. Welcome to the Carl Vibe Show. We have a very special guest today. I'm really excited. This has been a long time coming, you guys. We have met on different paths and different shows. Today, my guest is going to be Mark Turner. He is a prolific blogger. He has guest appeared on several different live shows and podcasts, also as a trained and experienced remote viewer with some psychic experience, and also possibly a UFO experiencer and witness as well. It's going to be very interesting to talk to him. He's also a U.S. veteran of the United States Navy, and he served during the Persian Gulf War. And so without further ado, let's go ahead and bring aboard Mark Turner. Mark, welcome. I'm so excited to have you on the show today. I think it's going to be just like hanging out as old friends. I feel like we've met on all these other shows so many times now, and there's so much that I have to talk to you about that I want to pick your brain about. I feel like our experiences are so similar in a lot of ways, but uniquely different. So Mark, welcome to the show. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing all right. Thanks. Glad to be here. And like you said, like every show we've appeared on, I've been sitting here nodding the whole time about everything you said. So I think we think very much alike.
Definitely. So Mark, everybody has kind of a story of how they get into the interesting type of stuff, like whether it be the paranormal, the UFO stuff, ufology and UFO research, or remote viewing and psychic stuff. Some people are into the mystical and meditation stuff and find their way over here onto this channel. So Mark, what is kind of your background that got you into this? Did it start as a curiosity and then you became an explorer, or did you have some experiences as a kid growing up that kind of fascinated you?
I'm kind of the guy who's willing to poke the bear. If the bear needs poking, I'm going to be the guy to go out there and poke it, right? So if I'm out in a crowd or something and something happens, you see something, and everybody says, I don't believe that's what it was that I saw, I'm going to be the one who's like, oh, heck yeah, it was. That really happened. And I'm going to push people on that. So I've always been very curious, sort of a investigative mind. I don't like people pulling things over on me, right? So if you say that something is one particular way, I'm going to say, prove it. I want to see it. I want to understand. I don't like the idea of anybody, trying to pull a fast one on me. So if I see a light in the sky, or have a strange feeling, maybe a smell that comes out of nowhere, which seems to happen sometimes when I'm around haunted places, I want to know why. It's like, what can I rule out here? Is it an airplane? Is it a UFO? Who knows? But I am very much a person who wants to find stuff out himself. So I would say my kind of journey on this whole thing really began when I was in high school, and I started keeping a dream journal. And every night I would dream, and then I would write this down in my little notebook before I went to school. And I started to notice that so many things that had happened during the school day were things that I had dreamt about. And so this really changed my mind about, how does time work? How is it possible that I could see these events before they actually happened? So I was really intrigued by that, and that really just started making me pay attention to all these kind of things that probably a lot of people also could experience, but really just kind of don't pay a lot of attention to.
Yeah, see, it all started for me when I was a little kid, having kind of a recurring dream as well. I've started doing sort of a series on this channel where I just do a solo show where I'm trying to like tell all of my weird paranormal experiences growing up. And it was like that. I was, alone a lot as a kid, playing down in the basement where my parents owned a restaurant. Sometimes I would fall asleep down there, and it was so bizarre. I'd have this recurring dream where it was like a portal would open up in the wall, and I would walk through into like kind of an alternate dimension with like a checkerboard floor and this a really purpley blue colored, like almost like aurora borealis type sky, like almost like an astral plane type vibe to it. And then there would always be these stone pillars and strange stuff, but I'd have this dream over and over and over again. And I think my fascination with dreams, and like, what are the things in the dreams made out of? Like, if you go pick up something, an object in the dream, or even a person comes up and talks to you, it's always fascinated me, like how much of that is my own subconscious, like capable of projecting an entire realm around myself and then put myself in there. And I even think I have a body. I have hands, there's objects, there's like a whole scene, sometimes houses. And ultimately it's just like a dream. And my fascination with that has always been a little bit deeper than a lot of people around me. I think they just go to bed and it feels good and they dream and they're like, well, that was a weird dream, but sounds like you're kind of the same. You started having dreams that seem to come true almost, or have some deja vu. Maybe tell us some stories about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much deja vu. I would wake up, I would write down these scenes that I'd seen in my dreams, and then when they happened, of course, during the day, like for instance, I took auto mechanics in high school, and one dream I had, I was sitting in the front seat of a car looking at somebody who I thought was my brother. And we were adjusting like the shifter in this old Camaro or something. And it happened. And during the day, I'm sitting there in the front of this Camaro that we pulled up at the auto mechanics garage. And I'm looking at this guy, and I suddenly realized, wow, he looks a lot like my brother. So I kind of gotten the identification wrong in my dream, but that scene had taken place and I had written it down before I went to school. So as I said, that just blew my mind, that how is it that I'm seeing things before they happen? And is it because I'm special? I didn't really consider myself special. I don't consider myself special, but it did make me think that our ideas of time are really limited, But studying your dreams, I think, is a fantastic way of increasing your psychic ability and knowledge, because I think that so much of that information is in the dreams that you can bring up to the surface. And the more you work with your conscious mind and your unconscious mind, you become a very powerful person. I think being able to really utilize these skills that I think everybody has. So.
Yeah, I think even just like you're saying, the act of writing it down or keeping a journal suddenly is it just even that one extra step of being mindful of your own inner workings and your own thought processes and your own experience in reality, beyond just taking everything at face value for granted. Just that user interface from when you wake up in the morning and go through your day, and then when you fall asleep at night, everybody just puts that in this bucket, like that's just like hallucinations or some subconscious figments, But when you start to write it down and you start to pay attention or meditate, you realize this interdimensional levels, aspects of altered states of consciousness that are really phenomenal and interesting and tied into a lot of interesting things.
It still blows my mind how recently, like, scientists thought that the dreaming state was just some kind of biological process where the mind was figuring out where to put these the events of the day, store it in memory and everything. And it is completely different from that. It is so much more. So I think that is really a frontier that is just ripe for discovery. Even now, there is so much that we can learn about ourselves just by studying dreams.
So you started writing things down in your book, and then you noticed that there was congruencies from the dreams, and then things started to happen in the real world that seemed like almost precognitive from the dream happening. So what's some stuff that happened there?
Well, similar to that, I can think of one thing. Like right when I was in the process of writing down my dreams, still in high school, I remember being at lunch one day and suddenly being very concerned about a volcano erupting. And I was like, this is going to happen. I don't know what's going on. I got a little concerned. And I told my buddies at the lunch table that I get the feeling this volcano is going to explode or something. And then a couple of days later, this volcano in Colombia actually did erupt. And I thought, well, how did I know that was going to happen? I've always been the kind of guy who likes to read newspapers, even when I was a kid. But I mean, I don't think there was any real run up for that particular eruption. So that I started to realize when I started paying more attention to those little, little intuition, a little bit of nudge, like, hey, there might be something going on here, that often they would lead me in the right direction or give me information that I wouldn't have ordinarily had. So.
So you feel like kind of that upbringing, like keeping the journal and stuff like that. My mom did that too. She had me do like a free writing for some reason. And I think it was, before video games and things, it was like something to keep me busy. So she would put me down, and it was like maybe even something she saw on the Oprah Winfrey show. I don't know. But she'd be like, it was really great. It's helped me a lot, this kind of stuff. She would sit me down and say, as soon as you pick up the pencil and it touches the paper, you can't stop writing. You have to just come up with a story out of your imagination on the fly. And it's so funny how much that has helped me, with my career being a YouTuber and stuff, where I'm able to hit record on the camera and spiel out, like a full minute. And it almost feels like in that moment that flow state kicks in, and there's this deeper wisdom that takes over. And it's almost like I'm a witness to what's going on, and the words just flow out, and it's just meant to happen, and there's these phenomenal experiences like that where you're almost just kind of a passenger along for the ride. And if you pay attention to that, just like you're dreaming and keeping a journal and noticing that, you realize that your life is a lot more dynamic and connected, like you said. And you keep bringing up time. So what is it about these experiences that makes you question the nature of time, Mark? That's a really interesting thing.
The conventional wisdom is that time is a linear thing that goes from the past to the present to the future, and we're really only aware, honestly, of the now. And I've read stories from books from mystics and everything that talk about how time doesn't honestly exist, that everything is now. And you've probably heard that before, the gurus say the only thing that exists is now. And if you think about like when you can affect anything, it's actually right now in the present moment. But I think that if you work a little bit with your psychic abilities, you start to realize that your definition of now can change a little bit. And the past and to some extent the future are available to you. And that's kind of what happened, I think, in my dream journals, where I was looking ahead and seeing things that may or may not have been decided at that time, that this was going to happen. I think that I think in life we tend to make agreements with each other, maybe not necessarily consciously, but subconsciously, to get together or do certain things. I think there's a lot of behind the scene back channel communication between people that some people probably aren't even aware of, that I think that kind of leads to these funny coincidences where you're walking down the street and you bump into somebody that you've been meaning to talk to, right? I think there's some kind of communication that goes on at a deeper level, where we're always collaborating on like what's going to happen and what we're going to do. And maybe that's what it was that I was tuning into,
Yeah, that's really interesting, because in the dreamscape, it's almost a deeper level of that, because if you're talking to another person in a dream, you really are kind of just talking to yourself, unless another entity or consciousness has stepped in there and is formed up as an apparition within a dream, And so when you bring that into the real world, we think of our consciousness as just being inside of our mind, and our thoughts being just sort of like a little stage contained like in a fishbowl in there, that's only a prism that we can see, but right. The truth is that when you get into these psychic informational experiences and these data downloads, you realize some of these people that do the remote viewing sessions will even get into almost the mind of the target sometimes, and the individual, and read their thoughts and their emotional state, and how they're frustrated about things, and how they're maybe even have some sort of a disorder or mental health problem. It's very interesting when you realize that what we think is such a private life, what we think is just like, oh, this is something that happened a year ago, and now it's over and gone in the past. There are people like you out there that have had remote viewing experiences that kind of seem to transcend that, where you're able to look through the prism from multiple different angles, almost like a kaleidoscope looking through time from all those different perspectives and seeing things that you shouldn't be able to see from where you're sitting. So how did you get into remote viewing from just having these dreams and kind of psychic experiences growing up? And that's okay if it's a long story, because we got time here.
Yeah, I mean, I've got no hard stop here today, so I'm happy to talk until I get hoarse here. But I think that my exposure to remote viewing was pretty much like a lot of Americans, where it was late night talk show, right? The Art Bell show was going on in mid 90s. And, back when I was younger, I was willing to not go to bed at 10 o'clock at night, but, stay up and listen to it a little bit longer. And he had some of the Army remote viewers that would appear as guests on the show, like Ed Dames and Lynn Buchanan and Paul Smith and Joe Mcmonagle. And I would listen to some of those. And of course, Ed Dames was always considered like the doom and gloom sort of remote viewer who seemed to always show up with the latest disaster that he was trying to talk to everybody about. And, the time would come and go and nothing would happen. And so I was like, I don't know if I necessarily believe everything that he's saying. But there was one time when Art Bell mentioned that he had tried remote viewing and it worked for him. And something about that made it sound like, well, that sounds like it's legitimate that he actually tried it. And then a guest like Joe Mcmonagle would come on and talk about things, and I would learn a little bit about some of his background. He earned a Legion of Merit from the Army.
Yeah.
And that is a very rare, very highly prized award that they don't just give away to anybody. So the fact that he earned something like that immediately caught my attention. Like you said, I'm a Navy veteran. I understand how certain things work. And then the fact that the Army would be involved in this at all, right? I had spent 4 years in the Navy. I knew how conservative the military was. Everybody's looking out for their own career, and nobody wants to cross any lines that would discourage them, I guess, or keep them from being promoted. But here's the Army with this unit that was doing psychic stuff, right? And I looked into it, and some of the documents were out there. The CIA, I think, already posted some of these things on the website. It had gotten declassified, and I said, you know what? There's got to be something to this. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you are familiar with the whole story about how the unit got started, but there was a real concern because the Soviets at the time were pouring all kinds of money into this research. And the American intelligence community knew that they would not be throwing this kind of money at anything unless it was doing something for them, right?
Right.
So it sort of became like a psychic arms race where we had to get a team to figure out what they could see. I think that was the idea. It was sort of like, we call it like comment or something, communications intelligence, where you're trying to see where the leaks are happening. So that was really how it all got started. They wanted to get a group of people who were psychic together in the unit and see what our exposure was, basically.
Right.
So that caught my attention, and then I live in North Carolina. I happened to go to a workshop that Joe Mcmonagle gave at the Rhine Research Center, which is just down the road in Durham, and it was a weekend workshop. So it wasn't like officially formal training or anything, but it was enough to really just blow my mind away, because he gave us a number of targets, and they were in this double wrapped opaque envelopes. And all of a sudden I was, sketching things and writing things that I knew I hadn't seen before. And once you realize that you can do something like that, there's no going back. There's no going back to say, oh yeah, that's all just nonsense. But I mean, when it's staring you right in the face, you go, my goodness, I can't believe that I knew something that I had no physical way of knowing. So it's totally mind blowing.
Yeah. And Joe Mcmonagle, he's somebody I just am going through and almost done with his personal biography, his autobiography. And it's so amazing. And he doesn't even scratch the surface in there about he just says, I did a series on Japanese television and da da da, and he barely touches on it in a paragraph. But the truth is that guy did remote viewing on live TV, basically on a news channel, looking for missing persons, and had a really high success rate. Now, the thing about remote viewing is it isn't 100% perfect, but at the same time, nothing is. It doesn't matter how good of an expert you are. In science, to be statistically significant, you only have to have results that come back over 20%. And there's friends of ours, Mark, that have remote viewing records that are over 80% accurate at this point. It blows my mind. And Joe Mcmonagle is one of those people, like you said, he's been given awards because he's found missing persons. He's worked in counterterrorism cases. He's found kidnapped and abducted people, and been critical in helping rescue those people when they had no idea where they'd been taken. It's very fascinating. So, Mark, have you done anything with your psychic abilities or remote viewing professionally? Or are you working or involved with any groups that are doing it right now?
Well, I've kind of played around with remote viewing, I think, since that workshop back in 2006. I have taken basic CRV training from Paul Smith, and I've done training, like I said, a workshop with Joe Mcmonagle, and also a week-long training with Angela Thompson Smith. And actually, I have a session from that that I'd be happy to show you if you're interested. But I don't consider myself to be an operational remote viewer, because I think that it requires a track record of really being committed to that. And I'm the kind of guy who is into so many different things. I have not honestly carved out the time to sit down and practice, because that's the thing that is the only thing you can do, honestly, to make yourself a better remote viewer. It's just all practice and learning how your mind works. So there haven't been any cases where I've been invited in to work things, but honestly, I'm open to it. And I hope one day to do some operational work.
So, Mark, you've got, you said you've got some things that you could share with us, maybe some remote viewing sessions that you've got that you could share.
Yeah.
And then also you mentioned before the show that you might even have a little remote viewing session or experiment for people that watch this video to try at home, or some recommendations for people to get started. So that's really cool.
Yeah. Thank you for reminding me. Let's go ahead and spring this on everybody. Everybody who's watching.
Let's have some fun. So that's the one thing, is that everybody, Mark, I think they have two responses. They either go, nah, and they just think it's bull crap. They just scoff it off and they just ignore it like it's kooky woo-woo. Or they immediately say, okay, well then read my mind. And they think that you're like some kind of a circus freak. They don't understand the methodology and the modality behind it. They don't understand the double blind method and how you can't just sit down and do it for yourself, like that. So you're going to take us through that and kind of break down some of those barriers. I'm super excited to do this right now.
All right. So I'm going to show everybody this. I have something in this bag.
Okay.
Right. There's something in this bag, and I'm going to set it down here, and I want everybody to sort of quickly clear their minds, sort of think about what might be in that bag. And if you want to put your comments in the chat window or something, you can do that. And then at the end of our talk here, I will reveal what's in the bag, and we'll see how well people do with this. Okay.
Okay.
And it's actually, it might actually be better if you think about it now, and then you turn your attention back to what we're talking about, and kind of let that percolate a little bit in your head. Because
I will just say, I immediately doubt, and I'm like, okay, I think I'm 100% wrong right off the bat, but I'm willing to be completely wrong for like a year straight at this. I really want to learn how to do remote viewing, but I did right off the bat, as soon as, like, almost before you even reached over for the bag, it was like I saw something in my mind, almost like a slideshow, like that. Right. And I was like, I wonder if that's what it is, So, that was really interesting. So, go ahead.
Yeah. So this is great, because this is a very simple exercise, right? It is remote viewing because you don't know what's in the bag, so you're blind to it. It would be more like a training thing, because I obviously know what's in the bag.
Right.
But for those people who say, well, I don't believe in this or whatever, give it a try. You might surprise yourself, and I'm not going to reveal what it is until the end of the show, where we can show everybody at once. But the way to really, make this real for you is to do it yourself. So I bet you we're going to have some viewers who know what's in this bag and might surprise themselves when they discover that. So there's another thing you mentioned, Carl. I want to bring up the fact that you are willing to be wrong.
Yeah.
That is a key thing to remote viewing, because if you're pretty much like, imagine you sit down at a table, you've got a pile of blank paper in front of you, you've got a serious looking monitor sitting across the table from you, right? And there might be a whole lot on the line. There might be a missing person or something that you got to find. If you are holding on too tightly, you're not going to get any kind of data.
Right.
You're going to have a horrible time. So you're putting yourself out there. Your conscious mind has no idea what it is it's trying to do, and your ego might be getting in the way, saying, "All right, I this is all bogus. I'm not going to come up with anything," or how could I possibly know this information? You're putting yourself out there. It's a very vulnerable place to be. So part of the mindset that you really kind of have to get into is, I'm not at all invested in this particular session. I don't care whether I get anything or not. I'm just going to go with whatever I've got. And you keep it a very loose sort of feel to it. So when you start to ratchet down those stakes in your head, you can sort of let your ego take a little side street here, and then just let that information just sort of pop into your head. And generally, when you do that, you will be much better off. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's the perfect mindset for doing this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, because I can't differentiate at this point, like between an actual RV like hit or something that's real data coming through that's non-local from where I'm sitting and accurate or able to be validated, compared to me just imagining something, or the difference between me just my day-to-day constant daydreaming and my mind wandering and just that monkey mind going on. It's like that free association is almost a curse at the same time, to where your mind can become like word salad. Like, I get this initial impression that pops through, and then immediately the voice of doubt kicks in, and then it's like analytical overlay. Well, maybe it's this and this and this and this, and it's the mind wants to attack it at a million different angles. So Mark, how do you recommend, like, for people starting this, to just sit in that pocket or that sweet spot that you would say is effective remote viewing, and be able to tell the difference there?
Well, one of the things you mentioned is actually one of the best things you could do to improve your results, and that is meditation, because you are learning to quiet your mind and sort of let that voice in your head that's trying to offer various things or cast doubt on you take a little rest, right? And the idea is that you want to learn how to recognize when your imagination is jumping in, or when your conscious mind is, or your ego is trying to steer the direction of things, and then differentiate that between from the data that's actually coming back from whatever the target is. So it's a very fine line, and it's a constant practice of learning to differentiate your imagination from real data. So all that comes with practice. It helps with meditation. If you do meditation, you can quiet your mind so that you have a better idea about what might be intruding, and also I think as I mentioned before, working more with your subconscious on a regular basis. So keeping a dream journal, learning about the dream signs that you might constantly see in your dreams. Like, what does that mean? What is that all about? That helps further the conversation, I think, between your subconscious and your conscious minds, and might give you better data during an RV session.
Yeah. See, I struggle with that. Like, this whole cloud of thoughts that interferes. It's almost like there's this freight train of thought going down the tracks. And
I'm
it's
no
like,
different, I mean,
it's like
you're human.
there's this conscious space out there in front of the plow that's kind of plowing through the snow or something on the train tracks, and I'm the conductor back here. And the further behind the train you go, the more trash there is until you get to the caboose. And it's like, you have to almost think out there outside yourself just a little bit. Is there a type of meditation that you feel like is particularly effective? Because I know some of the new age stuff is so full of imagination and visualization, and really, like, I find like when it comes to this kind of stuff and being open, it's more like Dzogchen, which is really just kind of like that natural, just naked awareness of just being fully present without any of that dialogue going on. So is there any kind of like actual meditative approach that you recommend? Or
I think it might be more useful just to do a non-guided meditation, because it might actually, plant some ideas in your head that might lead into your RV session later on. So that's kind of the stuff I do, non-guided meditation. And actually, to assist me with my meditation, I have a Muse headband that I wear. If you've heard about that, it gives you real-time feedback on where your brain waves are, and you hear like a rainforest if your mind is scattered, and if it's focused, then you hear birds, right? For instance. So I find that useful to do every now and then as a cool down. I know that some remote viewers like Dick Allgaier like to listen to theta waves, like binaural beats that generate theta waves. Everybody's got their own sort of ritual, and I think that's kind of how Paul Smith describes it. It's not so much the meditation, but the ritual, where you're kind of like getting your head in the game, like an athlete would do if they're gonna, right before they walk out on the field, right? They're pumping themselves up, whatever it takes. You could put red shoes on or something like before you do a session. Whatever works for you, whatever gets you in that mindset of being ready to go out there and do it. So anything that works for you is best. And really, this is such a personal kind of endeavor where you really have to know what works best for you. And we are all unique, and everybody has their own methods, and it just takes a little bit of I guess trial and error until you find something that works for you.
Yeah, in fact, there's a lot of different approaches to remote viewing, and it seems like for a time there's a lot of different debates going on about it. Like, this is too assumptive and has too much AOL or analytical overlay and ego involved, or this is too, like you can only do cognitive remote viewing and do it with this method because that's the one that the military used, and it's like, but really the people involved that are actually doing it seem to because the phenomenon of remote viewing seems to adapt all the time and change as the remote viewer gets into it. It seems like their methods and approach to it are constantly fluid and changing too. Like you read stories about people starting out liking to be in a room with like hemisync music and using kind of like a particular approach and having almost like a ritual to warm up, to get ready and to dejunk their own consciousness and the whole thing. And then you've got later on people like Joe Mcmonagle who say like, you should be able to do this upside down with your head in a mud puddle, breathing through a straw. It shouldn't matter if you've got all these rituals. It's a real phenomenon. And once you get it down, you just have it and stuff. So, so interesting. So what is kind of your approach, Mark? And maybe you can share some of what you've done with us here.
Well, like I said, I'll put the headphones on. I'll do a meditation for about 10 minutes or so, try to clear my mind and have everything kind of set up for me in front of me. So I'll have my paper and a quiet room that I can work in, mute the phone. Don't get distracted by anything. And then, and like I said, just try to pay attention to your mind. And you can't chase the data. You let that data sort of come to you. That's the other thing. If you're chasing it, you're doing it wrong. If you're quiet enough and you're open to it, those impressions will show up. And as far as like the methods that you talked about, I mean, there is debate over like the various ways of doing remote viewing. I kind of like Joe Mcmonagle's definition, where it's only really remote viewing if everyone involved in it is double blind. So no one knows what the target is. Anybody in the room has no idea what the target is, and you can reproduce that in the lab very easily. So he looks for that lab level kind of standard. usually the people outside of a lab, they're going to have some idea about, at least somebody's going to have some idea about what the target is. But as the viewer, you don't necessarily, you don't want that kind of information. You mentioned AOL before. I don't know how many of your viewers understand what AOL is. That is called Analytical Overlay, which is a term that Ingo Swann coined, I believe, that really, it addresses those kind of things that pop into your head that in a more structured version of remote viewing, like CRV, that's data that you get that is out of structure, something that shows up that you're not supposed to be looking for at that particular time. So you generally write that down on the side of your paper, just so you can clear your mind, say, okay, I recognize that. It's very much like meditation, you know, where you're thinking, you're trying to quiet your mind, and you have a thought that sort of pops into your head, and you're supposed to acknowledge it, say, I hear this, I'll put it aside and go back to, you know, focusing on my breath. And AOL is kind of like that thing that just sort of intrudes where it shouldn't, and you write it down, you clear your mind, and you keep going again. So that's kind of what that is all about. So when you start with a session, because you're blind, you don't have any preconceptions about what it is you're going to be viewing. And that's really the only way that you can progress. There are a couple of things called, in certain cases, you can get a little bit of information about it just to really speed things along. And that's only really if you're a more advanced viewer. Like, for instance, if you've been hired in an operational setting to go find a missing person, your tasker might say, okay, this is a person, tell me about this person. And that's called front loading, where you get a little bit of idea where to focus. So that you have to be very careful with that, because if you give away too many hints, then you can really kick that viewer's imagination into full gear, and then you can't trust, you know, whatever it is that they come out with. So
it's almost like the subconscious mind says, oh, that reminds me of this, and then the story gets hijacked, kind of like
yeah, that's called what, castle building, I think, is what the Army viewers called it, where you come up with one thing and then you keep piling on other things to sort of build that out, and you wind up getting completely off tracks. That, you know, that happens sometimes.
There's also, it's almost this phenomenon. I use a lot of metaphors. It's almost like if you open up the aperture of the consciousness, you know, and it's just like this pure white light, because you normally have this whole radio playing or dialogue going on that is your own conscious mind. So let's say you quiet that and you open up the aperture to this pure kind of openness. And then suddenly these images sort of begin to enter into the lens or into frame, where you begin to witness or experience or sense things that are almost like a visualization or imagination, but it feels outside of what you would do. And the problem is a lot of times our mind wants to grab a hold of a little aspect of those images and grab onto them and microanalyze them or overanalyze them. And that's when that analytical overlay comes in, and you start saying, I've got this, and I think I know what this is or who this person is, and you want to name it and give it a label, when really,
and that'll kill you every time.
Okay, so you just have to keep that aperture wide open and just continue to witness the images and the scenes and the impressions and everything as they flow through. I'm actually really learning a lot. That's why I'm repeating a lot of this. That self-awareness is a big deal. Hearing you describe it is really cool. So yeah, so you're able to peel through that and kind of be that open aperture, and then images come in. You try not to cling on to anything too tight, and meanwhile, you're kind of super positioned and you're still there in the room, and you're drawing, kind of free writing on the paper, these impressions that are coming through. So
yeah, so the key to doing good remote viewing is to curb your habit of trying to name things. So the remote viewer's job is to describe those impressions that come in, write them down. So just the impressions. Don't try to assemble them, right? Because when you try to name something, then the imagination kicks in, and then you wind up, like I said, castle building and coming up with something that has no relevance to the particular target. So it's a constant battle of just describe, don't analyze, don't name. And if you can learn how to only go with descriptions and maybe sketches and avoid as much as you can your tendency to try to want to name something, then you will be a great remote viewer. And that is a constant battle, because often you'll get data that suggests something and you think that you're on target or whatever. And then you wind up trying to describe something that your mind has named that, is completely off target. In order to do really good remote viewing, you train yourself not to name. And, that can be difficult, but with practice, it comes, and then you get better sessions as a result.
Really, it's the same with meditation, I found as well. I practice it even in the grocery store when I'm walking around. You see all the labels and all the items on the shelf and everything trying to market to you and the prices. And it's a real mental exercise to be able to walk around and free your mind from this slavery of reading everything. It's like, you get so hung up. You walk down the aisle at the grocery store and you're like, oh, no. And there's this whole dialogue. You cannot stop reading all the freaking labels, And then even when you're not looking and being fed information, your mind wants to feed itself with these old tapes that it replays, or music and these distractions and stuff. And really what you're saying is, with remote viewing, and that when we try to understand the true nature of consciousness and reality, is that beyond just that constant dialogue going on in the head, there is this source information that is timeless, that contains everything that has ever happened, and that everything that is happening now is accessible to an individual that practices this. And so having that intention and that focus and everything is a critical part. It's super interesting. Mark, can you show us a little bit of what you've done, or maybe a session?
Yeah, let me flip over here. I've got OBS set up, and there's a page.
And if any of you guys that are watching have questions in the comments section, I'm popping them up on screen. I know we've got one that came in earlier about remote viewing non-human intelligences, and we're going to be talking about that here in a little bit, about remote viewing entities that seem to notice that you're remote viewing them, even in the past, and different things, and then they seem to come into your present life in a paranormal fashion. So maybe we'll talk about some of those things and your thoughts about that too. But okay, so Mark, I'm going to pull you up. Let's see if I can make you more. How do I make you go full screen? I don't know how to do this. See if I click it again.
I'm going to try to make this page a little bit bigger here too.
Yeah.
But this is a session that I did with Angela Thompson-Smith's class. And it was, I think it was my first target I worked. Yeah, they're making it a little bit bigger here. It was the first target I worked, and she was my monitor. And during training, she gives feedback to let me know if I'm on signal line or not. And that's fair for training. Normally you wouldn't do that during an operational particular session. So let me just quickly describe a little bit about what you see here, the format of this page. First off, you write down your name, date, and stuff here. This is like the controlled remote viewing method, CRV. If you have any aesthetic impact things, anything that's on your mind that might distract you, you write that down here. If you have any personal inclemencies, that sort of thing, you write that down. And there's the target that I was assigned. So she sat me down at a table. She said, your target is YZW589. And then I wrote that down. Actually, it was YCW. I guess I apparently got that wrong, misinterpreted her, but it's YCW589. Then I drew what's called an ideogram, which is supposed to be like a spontaneous movement of the pen. And this is something I'm still working on, actually. But it generally is supposed to be looking somewhat similar to the target that you're working. Okay, so it should roughly be the same shape of whatever it is you're doing. So then you kind of describe the movement you felt when you were drawing the ideogram, and so that's what I did here. And I said I picked up that it's land, man-made, and water. Okay. And over here in the column, remember we mentioned analytical overlays. I was writing down a few of those here too. So these other things that would pop into my head, I would write down on the side of the page. And the way I tell people personally how I consider this, when you get these AOLs, it's not that they're necessarily wrong information. It could be that these images or thoughts that you have are telling you something that's important about the target. So you write them down on the side of your page like this, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're wrong. And sometimes you can find some hints here in your AOLs that might actually help you out. But in a CRV session, sometimes these thoughts come in way too early in the process. And so they have to be considered out of structure. So if you're getting really strong visuals right from the start in a remote viewing session, you're doing CRV, then chances are it's AOL. Chances are it is something that does not matter. So so you can kind of more or less just, I wrote it down, I kind of put it aside, I kept going. Then I went to my stage 2 and I'm starting to pick up some impressions. Now, the thing that a lot of people who are new to remote viewing don't realize, it is not just vision, it's not just images that you are getting. It encompasses all of your senses. So you don't just necessarily see things, you can hear things, you can taste things, you can sometimes feel the emotions in more advanced targets. If you're looking at a scene or a person, you can get what's called aesthetic impact. So that's the feeling of the target affecting you. So for instance, if you were standing on the top of the Eiffel Tower, aesthetic impact might be, wow, this is expansive and I feel tall, and that is legitimate data. So you would write that down as an AI. And when you're working a target, eventually you will get enough data, and that aperture that you were mentioning will open up enough that you will start to get feelings from that target. And that's when you know you're really starting to zero in on the target. So in this case, I was doing my stage 2. I had salty, bright, wide open, warm, windy, tall, and then laughter. All right. Might be considered a little out of structure in this case, but it's something I heard, right? Laughter. So I wrote that down. And then I started to get the sense of an oval. And I drew this kind of shape that looks like an airfoil or something almost. I started writing down ocean sight for AOL, bridge or Chesapeake Bridge, ship's deck or something. And I think in this case, my mind was trying to name this. And that can be a little bit challenging. So
one second, really quick,
yeah.
Mark. If you go back on that page, I mean,
Yeah.
your ideogram, that's kind of like a Rorschach, right? I mean, it's just the most basic, intuitive, just squiggle. But right off the bat, when you did it the second time, it almost already looks like a mountain range and like a lake, or like,
yeah, it looks like there's water here, right? And
yeah, it almost kind of begins to look like Bob Ross elements, like you've got
that
the
might
mountain
be the
range.
best ideogram I've ever done, to be honest.
Great,
usually they're just squiggles and they have no so I'm still working on the ideograms.
Yeah, and so again, just like keeping the dream journal, the fact that there's kind of a methodology to this, so to where you have the way to begin, the way to settle into it, how to categorize and toss your AOL off to the side columns, and sort of right off the bat, as you start to use a method or work with people that have been doing this, it helps you organize that mental picture and thought processes. Like you said, some of it gets so like synesthesia, like I will smell something, like I'll smell smoke and I'll be like, oh, is there, and it could be anything, like, is there like a fire? Am I sensing all the forest fires going on? And then suddenly it's just this like a familial presence. It's like, oh, it's dad, or there's this, but that's comes from meditation. But you're saying it's the same in remote viewing a lot. You'll have sensations or smells or,
yes, you will get, it's not just vision. You'll get feelings, and you'll hear things, you'll smell things, touch things, taste things. Any of your physical senses can be represented here, and that data comes into your head. It's like it's bypassing the actual neurons that lead from your physical senses and just going directly into the brain. So and it's really cool when it happens. So when you do a session, don't just focus on the visuals or how things look necessarily, but go after everything. Like for instance, our target here in the bag, right? I want you to think about the other senses that might be represented here and see if that helps you tune in. Okay.
Yeah. That was the first impression that I got, was actually a color and a smell when you lifted up the bag.
Okay.
which is
All
funny.
right.
Yeah,
All
and
right.
a kind of like a sensation of a shape,
All
but
right.
we'll see.
Write that down or something so that we got a record.
Okay.
So I just wanted to show you this really quick. I'll go through the rest of this very quickly. So I got an emotional impression of leisurely. I kept seeing this shape, this really crazy shape that looked like an airfoil or something. And I sensed movement and jumping. And then I kind of drew a picture that looked like the deck of a ship or something, or a submarine. There was something about that. I thought, what's going on here? It feels like there's water involved. It's flowing. I see layers. And then I was drawing shapes with the water. And then I kept looking at that. And something clicked in my head. And I said, you know what? That's a surfboard. I've got a surfboard. And then Angela said that I'd named it, right? She said, okay, all right, that's the end of the session. So I did a quick stage 4 that talks a little bit about that. I got the impression of there was a lot of fun happening. It was exciting, energizing, playing, fast surface.
So
and,
wait, that was the target. It was this. It was surfing.
Let me show you. Can you see that? It's not the best.
What the heck, dude?
This was a contest held in California to see how many people could be on a surfboard at the same time.
Wow.
And I think the record was like 60 something people, 60 very brave people, I guess. But that was my target. And it was a contest. So those impressions of laughter and fun and all that came through. So
but I mean, at the beginning of this, it could have been anything. It could have been like a treasure box in the desert out in Nevada.
It could have been anything. I had no clue. And Angela, of course, was giving me some feedback when I was talking about various things, which is what one does in training. But that shape just kept popping in my head. And I said, what is this? And then it just occurred to me, it's a surfboard. And it turns out it was a very large surfboard.
That is a huge surfboard. How many people are on there? Do you know?
I think like over 60. And if you look online on YouTube, I think there's a video that shows them doing that. Looks like it was a lot of fun. And I think they did get the world record for that many people. So.
That is cool. So go back to the last page on your RV session.
Yeah.
And then the one before that.
Yeah. So that's stage 4, and then stage. Do I have a stage?
You drew the one you just set down. You drew it. I mean, like, look at that. There's a surfboard.
Doesn't that look like a surfboard?
It's like you're overhead looking down on it from the side. So you notice how it's not directly like the point of view of the photographer. You're seeing the scene 3-dimensionally, like you're flying out over it in creative mode. You know, it's not like you're just seeing it from the perspective of the photographer on the target. You're seeing the actual scene,
right?
Like you're there. And sometimes that can be superimposed from the side or overhead. Is that beneficial to change the point of view like that?
What happens is that I mean, you can see it from different angles, and in fact, during some sessions, your monitor might give you a movement exercise that says, go 100 feet above this target, and something should be visible. And then that can kind of cue your mind into, imagining or whatever that you were above the target. And sometimes, you'll get a completely different point of view. And a lot of that depends on the particular target. If you're doing like the Eiffel Tower, for instance, and you said go 100 feet above it, you would see, like the expanse of the grass around it or whatever, and maybe some of the city. So, I mean, it's helpful to do that. And if you look at some of the sketches that you might do in a session, it doesn't necessarily have to correspond with what's actually on the ground, because of that fact that you could be looking at it from any particular angle, whatever angle makes sense to you. So in this case, that's how it went. So
that's so fascinating, Mark. I love stuff like this. It blows my mind because the implications of it are incredible. Not only the implications for what it means about us as humans and our human potential, what it means about the actual nature of reality, and kind of what we've been taught or told that is meant to kind of keep us in a particular box or to control our potential, maybe. And so there's a lot of different angles to talk about this and to approach it. But it's amazing that now with the internet and with shows like this and conversations like this, we're able to meet and discuss this and kind of tie a thread through all of it. And the implications get even deeper when you start to remote view some of the dark secrets and the weird mysteries of reality and what might be going on with maybe UFOs or the paranormal or some of these incidents throughout history. So what are some of your more favorite kind of psychic experiences or remote viewing targets that you think are credible or interesting and worth talking about?
Well, I haven't done a lot of these mystery types of targets, being that I'm a bit early, I guess, in the training. There's several layers of training to be done that really open up to some interesting things. But I've heard and read of some very interesting targets. For instance, a book that I would recommend if you're interested in learning about stuff. This is Joe Mcmonagle's book, Mind Trek. And chapter 16 of Mind Trek talks about the session that Joe did at the Moreau Institute, where he was tasked with the Cydonia region of Mars. And so this was recorded, and Joe likes to do what we call extended remote viewing, which is basically getting as relaxed as possible, just right down to the edge of sleep almost. And then sharing his impressions. So this whole chapter talks about these alien races that used to live on Mars, and how some of them are waiting around for somebody to come back and rescue them or something like that. And there are massive pyramids there on the surface of Mars that just dwarf the ones that we have in Egypt, for instance. And a lot of it's very, very interesting stuff. So I had tweeted a little bit about that recently, just sort of dropping some hints. Like Tom McNair also did some remote viewing of Mars, and he was the keynote speaker at the International Remote Viewing Association meeting last week. And he was reviewing the data from, I think, 17 or 19 remote viewers who were also tasked with Mars. And every single one of them found things there that one wouldn't necessarily expect to find on a barren, desolate planet. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, it's super weird. And there's weird stuff like even the cartoonist that worked for was it Marvel or DC, Jack Kirby. He wrote a comic book about the face on Mars and the pyramids on Mars before NASA or the government ever even supposedly sent any probes to Mars or revealed any of that. And the face that he even drew in the comic books looks just like the pictures of that strange monolithic face on Mars, that rock feature that's been remote viewed, that's supposedly some ancient prehistoric civilization site and things. And so it's really fascinating when you find out Jack Kirby was also working with the CIA back then. So what the heck was going on? You know, it's like all tied into the comic book industry and Hollywood and the CIA and remote viewing Mars. But yeah, even the moon, if people remote viewing the moon or different UFO sites and things. I know, was it Pat Price that supposedly looked at different extraterrestrial sites? Or...
Yes, Pat Price was one of the first ones, I think, to do that at SRI. And it was just something he wasn't tasked with. He just came up with it. But I think the story goes that he came in and dropped these the session data on, I think it was Hal Puthoff's desk, and said, "Look what I found. You know, I've located these 4 alien bases on Earth." And that was kind of the start, I think, of people remote viewing these alien bases. But as that had been tasked further on, other remote viewers were getting the exact same data. So, people question whether or not there might be aliens in a mountain in the Mojave Desert. And my answer is, well, why not? Since they seem to be in many other places around Earth. So.
Yeah, you never know if they're in some kind of an ability to hide in our blind spot in reality or perceptual awareness. That's the thing, is when you realize these things, even like the phenomenon of remote viewing in human consciousness, one of the most first realizations is how limited you didn't realize you were before, how blind you didn't know that you were before. Like you've got a pair of blinders on or goggles on, and suddenly you realize, wow, there's way more to this. And we're just scratching the surface. Some of these guys are like Paul Smith and Daz Smith and Joe Mcmonagle and Ingo Swann. They're really like pioneers and adventurers on the forefront of this, trying to understand it. Maybe Carl Jung and these ancient oracles, but always in the past, I think, got treated like a shaman or a witch or some sort of a a paranormal thing. But now it's getting utilized. It's been used by the government. It's being treated very serious, and now there's people involved in meditation that are having phenomenal encounters and experiences. So like, have you had any so far where you've been like remote viewing or meditating and felt like you've had something notice you, or like another entity or awareness that you would call other dimensional or spiritual or extraterrestrial in that sense?
It's kind of funny. In the two separate week-long trainings I've done for remote viewing, I have had the impression that there have been others hanging around, and I think they were interested in what I was doing. Not so much the individual targets, because we weren't tasked with doing ETs or anything like that. But there was some crazy energy around both times. Both times I went through week-long trainings with Angela and with Paul Smith. So it would not surprise me.
Like energies, as in like did you feel like your awareness was just more opened up to these other dimensions, or do you feel like it kind of, like I use this analogy, like chumming for sharks, suddenly you're putting a signal out there that suddenly puts you on the radar to be paid attention to?
Well, I think I've had experiences all my life, which I haven't gotten into, but I think that I think they're happy that I'm exploring remote viewing. I honestly get that impression that this is something they want to see more people do, and so I think they were closely watching how things were going, and they were making their presence known in certain cases. So yeah, I mean, I think they want to see more people become more open psychically and use these mental abilities that we all have, because I think that like you said, I mean, it's like taking the blinders off. The way we think about who we are and how we interact with people is so limited. And if you play more with your psychic skills and abilities, and open your mind up more to bigger possibilities, I think that you find that it's a far more interesting world than you first expected. So.
Yeah, I think people are terrified of it. I know when I mention to people that I'm interested in this kind of stuff, like mystical research and meditation or astral projection. The Monroe Institute does out of body stuff. I've done all that gateway meditation stuff, and it's really cool. I like a lot of it. But people get terrified that somehow they're going to attract a demon, or there's going to be a poltergeist suddenly in their bedroom at night banging around in their closet, or they're going to start having these crazy nightmares. And, I got to be honest, some of it at a certain level is a little bit scary. And I can't say that some of that at a certain level hasn't happened to me. But also working through a lot of those experiences, those always in the end ended up being positive. When the only advice I can give, and people can take this for what it's worth, that have these types of encounters or interactions, is to approach it like a distraught family member. Even if there's an entity or some sort of shadow being, or in a meditation, you feel like something's really confronting you. Whenever I've approached it with a heart of compassion, like even if this was like my cousin who was going through an addiction withdrawal or really struggling with their mental health, you don't even know what you would look like if you could see your own subconscious outside yourself approaching you. So don't have too much prejudice, but also make sure that you're being mindful and know what you're doing, and stick with your intention as well. So
anything is very important. And mindset, if you are expecting something good to happen, then it will most likely happen. And the opposite is true, I think. So.
Yeah. So what has happened to you, Mark? Is anything interesting or fascinating that might be relatable for people?
Well, remote viewing has opened me up to really pay more attention to my psychic intuition. And let me just mention one thing I was thinking of. About 5 years ago, I was at my desk and decided to go out and grab some lunch. I was working at a IT company, I think, and went out and got my lunch, came back and decided, well, I need to go to the ATM to get some money. So hopped in the car and drove over to the closest ATM. and I'm in the parking lot waiting my turn to get to the ATM. And all of a sudden I noticed that I'm having these crazy thoughts about like, well, if I was driving a getaway car, which way would I go? Is there an exit over there that I could do? Or how would I get in and out of here as quickly as I could? And I thought, that's crazy. Why in the world am I thinking about these thoughts? I mean, there was nobody around. It was midday, sunny day, and I was just waiting my turn to go use the ATM. But I had these crazy thoughts about like a getaway car, and it didn't make any sense. So I finally wound up getting the money I needed out of the ATM, went back to my desk, and then I was checking the local news site maybe an hour or two later, and they were saying that branch had been robbed. And it was 5 minutes after I had been there.
And you're almost like connected or empathing in these guys who had robbed the bank, possibly some sort of like an escape route. Like
somehow I picked up on it. And I thought about it later, like that was just bizarre. Like, why in the world would I be thinking these things? And then it was literally 5 minutes later that they walked into that branch and assaulted a teller and wound up getting money. And somehow, I don't know, I can't explain it, but I knew that something weird was going to happen there. And that, I think, just comes from learning how to trust my psychic intuition. And I think remote viewing helped with that. And if you practice this on a regular basis, yeah, I mean, you start off thinking that, what am I opening myself up to? But at the same time, I think that something inside me was telling me that. It was telling me, you should be aware of this. Something is going to go down, right? Yeah. And it was communicating to me the only way it knew how, right? So was I necessarily picking up the thoughts of these robbers? I didn't go back and find out if they'd actually taken the route, into the parking lot that I was trying to suggest, but it was telling me that something bad is about to happen. And I think that, I mean, given a choice, I like knowing when things that are bad are about to happen, because then I can, decide how I'm going to react to them. And so I think overall it's a positive, right? You want to, I'd much rather have that information than not have that information. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree. What are your thoughts, Mark, on, are you familiar with CE5, like the Stephen Greer's protocol of remote viewing or reverse remote viewing? And I'll just say as a caveat, because I've tried it and I've downloaded it and gone through it and stuff. And funny enough, way before he came out with his stuff, I kind of was doing a similar thing and had weird experiences and saw stuff. But I wanted to know what your thoughts were. I'm not necessarily a believer or proponent of it, but
well, I am an experiencer. I've had experiences before, and so I don't know if there's something that I can do that others necessarily can or can't. I don't know how it reacts to people who haven't had experiences.
Really quick, maybe I'll just explain to everybody who doesn't know what CE5 is. It's this concept that you can sit down and use a form of meditation that gets referred to like remote viewing, where you basically project your location, almost like Google Earth, out into the cosmos, like a signal, like a radio signal, into the cosmos, into the universe, in order to send out a signal, assuming that there's entities or beings out there either evolved enough to have the ability to detect that signal and know exactly where you're at and come say hello, or they have the technology to pick up that signal. And if you do a good enough job with your intention, remote viewing, or pointing out exactly in the universe and the solar system and on the planet right where you're at, with a group of people, then something will show up in the sky or things will begin to manifest to you. So that's kind of the idea. And there's a whole app you can download and all that stuff. So anyway, back to what your thoughts are, Mark, now that everybody knows what the heck that is. What do you
think? Yeah, thank you for explaining that. I don't know. I don't necessarily subscribe to everything that Stephen Greer does. I've seen some questionable videos out there. I know a lot of people have. I think that there are some things that he's done that have been worthwhile. As far as CE5 goes, I've kind of got a mixed opinion about it. There's a lot of life out there in the universe. I mean, if you think about the statistics, just I think we've already determined that for every star that you can see in the sky and every star that actually is in the sky, there's at least one planet. So I personally believe that the universe is teeming with life, and I think the statistics bear that out. Uh, we don't know a ton about all that different life, right? We don't know about these other races. We know that there are, or at least some of us know that we are being visited here, right? I mean, who do you think is driving those Tic Tacs, right? I think that you got to be very careful about who you invite into your front door. So if you are just blindly doing C5, I don't know what all the protocols are necessarily, but I think your intention, once again, is very important about that you want to have benevolent beings show up if you're out calling, to whoever might answer. I think in general, like the ones that I have interacted with have been fairly friendly, but there are quite a few reports out there of some beings that are not friendly, and there have been some remote viewing sessions, I guess, that help bear that out. And I think I also dropped a hint about that too in Twitter. So, like if somebody was just walking down the street in front of your house and it was dark, you couldn't see their face, would you necessarily invite them in and have a beer with them?
Yeah, and same if you're in a busy city and you go out to the street corner and put yourself out there to have anybody come up and give you free hugs. Usually the first people to come running up there are not the safest. A lot of times they're really mentally distraught or drug addicts or homeless people, and so how do we know that that's not the same out in the cosmos where something very needy or distraught shows up first and you're just beginning and untrained and unfamiliar with this kind of stuff. And they're just evolutionarily or technologically way beyond what you can fathom to be able to deal with that. So
so it's just like in remote viewing. Tasking is important, intention is important. If you want to invite friendly beings to come say hello, you might have some luck with that. I would try to focus more on that than just like have anybody come through. I don't use Ouija boards for that reason because you never know what you're going to get with that. But yeah, just do it very mindfully, as you said. It's not just a matter of something showing up, but you want something showing up that is going to have a positive experience for you.
Yeah. Do you mind sharing any of your experiences with that, or do you want to save that for some other time?
I will mention this. A couple of weeks ago, I had gotten excited again about UFO Twitter. I love all those conversations that take place there. And so I went out on my back porch and just thought in my mind, okay, if anything is out there and hanging out and listening to me, give me a sign or whatever. So sat quietly in my chair, looked in various portions of the sky. And then there was one spot that I started to focus on. And then all of a sudden I got a flash in that particular spot of the sky, like a flash bulb, just popping like that and then going away. And it was right where I was looking. And I think it was the answer to my question. So left me smiling the rest of the night and knowing that, they're still hanging around. So.
I have the same thing happen all the time, Mark. So just so you don't feel strange about that, that's what I was talking about. Like, I don't understand, I understand the CE5 protocol, but there is something to that. I've seen, I look up, I get this feeling like hello, or some kind of like a response, almost like I'll be meditating with my eyes closed, very altered state of consciousness, kind of like drift, setting my sails very carefully right where I'm at, sort of with my aperture open. And then I'll sort of put it out there, like to see if there's anything paying attention or if I sense anything. And sometimes, just like the brown paper bag, I'll get sort of almost like an image of, like a craft or something, even with beings on it, or visualization of something trying to respond. And sometimes I look up and don't see anything. And other times I'll see what looks like a star or satellite that will turn or change directions. And sometimes it's like a boom, like a flash bulb up in the sky. And it's very strange, but I have not had anything like come down and land. I haven't been taken, as far as I know. What are your thoughts about that? Like the abduction people or hypnosis and recounting?
I am one of those abduction people. I had that happen to me. This
Okay.
was after a series of months where I was seeing lights in the sky, and it started off in September 28th, 2013. It was the first day of the city of Raleigh's International Bluegrass Festival. We were sitting in Red Hat Amphitheater in downtown Raleigh at the top of the hill, waiting for Steve Martin and the Steep Canyon Rangers to play. They were the headlining band, and my wife looks over at the horizon right next to the amphitheater stage and points at these lights that are just kind of bobbing around right over the tops of the buildings. And there's probably a dozen of them, and they look like flares or Chinese lanterns or something like that. And I was probably too loud for her to actually talk much, but I looked at that and I was like, you know what? Those aren't airplanes. Those aren't airplanes. Those are they're something, but they're not airplanes. And so we enjoyed the show. Got home. They had fireworks at the end of the night, and so the next morning I called up the city's dispatcher and I said, "Did you get any other reports about strange lights in the city?" And they checked the records. They said no. I called up the fire department to see if they had launched flares just to get, I guess, a gauge of the winds before they did the fireworks, and they said no, we don't normally launch flares. And so I was completely baffled about what it was I saw. So, and the funny thing is, those types of lights, those amber orbs, tend to fly over every now and then. I'll see somebody else catch video of them, like a friend of mine did in the neighboring city of Durham just last month. He was out about 9 o'clock and saw these amber lights flying by, and he shared them on Twitter. And I said, yeah, that's exactly what it was I saw. So,
Do you think they're actual craft? Do you think they're like UFOs are actual ships? Because the military seems convinced, the government seems to be portraying that these are craft, but everything that I have not seen a metallic craft. The only thing I've ever seen has been like a welding light, or like a boom, like a ball of light or orb type of thing. And then just weird, bumps in the dark kind of shadow figure stuff. But I wonder, I don't know, have you seen any kind of like physical craft, metallic craft? I'm not saying that there isn't. I'm just really curious. Like,
yeah, okay. Let me talk about this. And you mentioned Ingo Swann before. Let me first start off by telling you a little bit about a book Ingo Swann wrote called Penetration. Have you heard about the book Penetration?
I've read it. I love that book where he goes to, is it Alaska? Where
he goes to Alaska and he watches this UFO rise up out of the lake. But the crazy thing is he's tasked by some shadowy government agency to remote view the moon.
Yeah.
And he expects to get your typical craters and maybe some, dead spacecraft or whatever. And all of a sudden he's picking up these human-like people on the moon. And it blows him away. He's like, and I read this book back in 2006. It was out of print, long out of print by then. So I found a bootleg copy and I'm reading it. I'm going, all right, Ingo Swann is pulling my leg here. There's no way any of this happened. And to be honest, a lot of people talk about Lou Elizondo's book deal. More power to him. I'm perfectly happy with that. But some producer out there needs to buy the rights to Penetration and turn that into a movie. That would be the most awesome movie.
It's so good, Mark. Yeah, I mean, there's even moments there where he's like at the cafe and runs into what might not be a human, but some sort of like either an extraterrestrial or some sort of a cyborg AI entity that looks like this beautiful woman that tries to flirt with him.
Yes, and they get upset with her because they say she's dangerous.
Yeah, these special forces guys come and snatch him out of there, and they're like, "Stay away from her. She's deadly."
It is the craziest tale, and it would make an awesome movie, and somebody out there should probably do it. But the reason I mention this book is that it was involved in one of my UFO sightings.
How? Really?
I was reading this book. It was the day after Christmas, 2013, I think it was. Beautiful day here in Raleigh, probably 60 degrees. It was sunny, very breezy. And I was reading Penetration, and because I found a copy. And about 3 o'clock, I put the copy of the book down and I go outside to refill my bird feeder, which is, it was hanging up next to my windowsill, and it was up quite a bit, but it was empty. And so I got outside. I'm out there trying to get my bird feeder down. I'm using this pole to try to unhook it. And as I'm sort of looking up in the sky, right where the bird feeder is, I see some crazy dark shape right behind it. And so I'm like, yeah, I don't know what that is. I'm going back, I'm unhooking the bird feeder. And then I realized, well, that's not a plane. It doesn't have wings. and I look at it, and I was living where a lot of these turkey buzzards would normally do their circular updraft flying and stuff, kind of, gliding around. So I'm looking at that going, okay, is it a turkey buzzard? Is it a helicopter? Is it a plane? And it looks, it's coming closer, and it's a round ball with these grayish spikes on it, which kind of reminded me of a flying leaf or a squirrel from how I saw it, just because like a flying squirrel, how they've got all their limbs out and they kind of have all these points, or like a pufferfish, something that, that kind of thing. And it was gray, and it was completely silent, and it was kind of moving very slowly, almost directly over my house. And so by the time I got through my list of things that I knew that it wasn't, I realized, oh my gosh, my camera is just right inside the door, 20 feet away. And I took a step over towards the door to grab the camera. And then by the time I realized, by the time I get that camera, this thing is going to be gone.
Yeah.
And so I let it just kind of drift into the beyond the trees and stuff, and couldn't see it anymore. But this was in the middle of the day, broad daylight, this crazy thing that was not a plane or a helicopter or a balloon or a bird or anything that I could identify. And it had flown right over my house while I was reading a book about UFOs. And it was positioned in the sky in the exact perfect place for me to see it.
Yeah, the coincidences are so odd, and you get the same thing in like the Nimitz Tic Tac thing, where it somehow knows the rendezvous point or the cap point before
the point, right?
Before the
kind
pilots
of
or even
connection.
Yeah, and you get that phenomenon over and over and over again. And this goes even into the ancient, strange, like esoteric stuff. Like when I was studying this type of meditation that the Dalai Lama does called the Kala Chakra. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I'm not, no.
But up in Tibet, they'll have this whole thing where, and sometimes over, 300 people will come up and get initiated into the Kala Chakra initiation. And for days, they'll do ritualistic chanting and bell ringing and meditation, deep levels of, group meditation all around this platform that is a representation of basically the inner consciousness. So it's like a diagram, almost like the Mayan calendar, this mandala that is like a pathway into the inner sanctum of this human soul. And it's so interesting because they draw it out of sand on this giant table with different colors of sand, all the different pathways, and they're meditating all the way through this, and then at the end, they just sweep it all up and dump it in the river like it's meaningless. But what's fascinating is every time the Dalai Lama does these meditations, there's like a huge uptick in UFO sightings that happens on all the websites, not just in Tibet and China, but around the world. It's like when the Dalai Lama conducts this, within like 3 days afterwards, you can see, boom, there's like this uptick in UFO sightings around the world. And it makes you wonder, because what is it about human perception or consciousness that seems to attract the phenomenon? And not only as craft, but Mark, do you think that this stuff comes down on the ground and accounts for like spirits and ghosts and poltergeists and things? And how does remote viewing connect with that?
It is really interesting how a lot of people who report experiences, contact, being abducted, what have you, also report poltergeist type activity. I don't honestly know how all that relates. I've watched a couple of episodes of Skinwalker Ranch, for instance, and there's really interesting things going on there. It's like
I was just there and saw a shadow figure along the fence line, by the way.
How'd that make you feel?
Very nervous when I walked up and realized there was nothing actually there. I thought it was a cow. And I walked up to it with a flashlight, like a blacklight flashlight, and I was filming. I walked up there, and then there was just like nothing there. And then I got that weird feeling of like something, now it could be behind me, or wait a second, what if this is it? And that realization really spooked me out. But honestly, that whole experience going to Blind Frog Ranch and Skinwalker Ranch and sitting right there by the ranch by myself until late into the night and meditating and trying to interact. Since I've come home, I've honestly had nothing but good stuff happen in my life. But
Good.
I've done nothing but promote like that positive familial
Good.
connection and like, do you need help, or I'm here for you to relate to kind of an attitude. And I've never had anything but good stuff happen. So
the people I've heard talk about visiting the ranch seem to say that your mindset is hugely important. About it really makes a difference on what kind of things you experience there. Do you think that's kind of related to your experiences? Do you feel like?
Yeah, I think it's kind of just like, if we're going to go back to like, if you're going to put bait out in the water, you're going to attract whatever you're chumming for, whatever you're trying to bait for. And so I think like there's some of that, but also if we go back to this concept of like the dreams, if you're lucid dreaming, if you're in the middle of a dream and then suddenly you become aware, wow, I'm dreaming, and you have that kind of phenomenal awareness in that moment, if you start to think about, boy, I hope a monster doesn't come around the corner, then what do you think, usually happens?
Exactly.
It manifests, like the monster
Right.
comes around or and it still scares you. And you're like, even in the dream, when you're the one thinking about it, your own anticipation, just like the Tic Tac sort of precognitively knows the cat point in a weird way. And so I don't know if that's because our dreams are more interesting than we give them credit for, or if the nature of reality is more dreamlike than we realize. And that interface with our subconscious and the phenomenon comes into play. I don't know if it's because the entities are malleable or incapable of really being, I don't know, how do I say this? Let's say if you're doing the initial Rorschach, that intuitive drawing that manifests into a remote viewing impression. Well, let's say something out of that counter space of the universe, this dark shadow realm or another dimension, steps forward. It may not have an appearance in our reality that we can fathom. So it has to sort of energetically interface with our own expectations.
I'm glad you said that.
And our own anticipations. And then we sort of see, almost like you would see shapes in a cloud, what you're either terrified of or whatever. It comes out almost like a plasma form, and then you fill in the gaps. Your subconscious interfaces, and then it pops into form. So I don't know. That's kind of my experience or impression with it, because it seems to be malleable depending on how I'm responding.
Something you mentioned there made me think about a little theory I've been sort of kicking around, and that is about Tic Tacs and UFOs and strange lights in the sky. It's my opinion that we are looking at two realities that are interacting, right? They don't seem to be part of ours fully. We're not part of theirs. And so I think that the reason they seem to have these amorphous shapes when you see these things in the sky is that we tend to have an agreement about how things should look as humans, right? We all kind of have a collective idea about what the Eiffel Tower looks like, for instance, or what a car looks like, or a plane, or whatever, right? Most of us do. I mean, I'm sure there's indigenous tribes in the Amazon that haven't been contacted that would not know what a helicopter is, right? I mean, we've seen that before. But we all expect to see something, and we all have an idea about what something like a UFO would look like. And I think that whoever's responsible for these craft have their own ideas too. And because we're not used to communicating, we don't have a collective sort of idea about what type of shape this thing should take place or take in our reality whenever they sort of dip in and out of our reality. So it makes me think that they're there and they aren't solid because we don't really have a common language that we're using between us and them. And that's why they look so they don't really have a solid shape. Not all of them, anyway.
Language is almost the problem, because we want to identify everything with nouns and pronouns and labels. You see a bird fly past, even when you're meditating, like initially as a beginner, a bird will fly by. And even if you feel like you're in that Zen state, your conscious mind goes bird, and oh, look at that bird, and has a whole dialogue in a human English language that was taught to you and put in there, with ABCs in preschool and by your parents as a kid, that isn't actually innate to the true nature of consciousness, which is that open aperture, like a child, becoming that open awareness to perceive and things. And kids seem to see these things. They have imaginary friends and have different sort of out-of-body experiences. I tended to kind of wet the bed as a kid because I would forget to take my body with me. I would like go into the bathroom and use the toilet and then realize halfway and I was like, wait, I'm still laying in the bed. You know what I mean? And then I'd go back to my body and realize in my bed and I'd wet the bed, kind of thing. So I think kids naturally are more open to that. And then we pound in these societal names and labels and identification onto things. And we do that with the phenomenon as well. We want to pound it into a religious aspect or a science fiction aspect, or we want to say, oh, it's just a hallucination of the subconscious. And then we identify it, we've named it, and we know it may not be any of those things.
So we talked before about the Dalai Lama. We talked about C5 and how like poltergeist activity sometimes is associated with this kind of stuff. I think what might be happening here is that you get a group of people who are learning to take the blinders off. Yeah. Right. And I think that group intention is at play. I think that I've actually seen some really crazy things happen when a group of psychics are together. Right. If you've ever gone to the International Remote Viewing Conference, often after all the main presentations take place, there'll be like a spoon bending party, for instance, and you'll get these people in the room. And I've seen this before. People will take this silverware, hold it up in their hands right in front of me, and it will fall over without them doing anything. And I've seen that happen.
Just like it melts in half, like Uri Geller would do.
It will fall over, yes, like a spoon, like a solid spoon, just holding it just like this, not even putting any pressure on the spot where it falls over, but it'll just almost like turn to butter in front of you. And you get a bunch of people in the room and you see that happening. If you've ever been to a spoon bending party, it's a lot of fun. And as soon as like the first person in the room bends a spoon, then it's like something clicks.
It's like contagious.
Well, it's weird. The way I describe it, I've done this a couple of times, but it's like the rules are somehow suspended all of a sudden. And I've been told when I was first learning how to spoon bend, it's like the spoon will tell you when it's ready to be bent. And I didn't really understand that at first, but when it's ready to bend, there's a shift in your consciousness and you feel the whole room change. And then all of a sudden, this solid piece of metal that's in your hand will become limp. And it happens.
Yeah, Daz Smith has talked about that before, almost the phenomenon of remote viewing itself seems to almost be alive or have a consciousness to it. Like the manifest reality, or what we consider physical reality, is some sort of an etheric field that has a consciousness. And you almost wonder if like Carl Jung I actually have the Red Book. I don't know if you've read that. It's crazy. No. But I mean, it's literally his conversations with his own subconscious as if they are entities outside of himself in different phenomenal, almost remote viewing realms or different dimensions. And it's really fascinating because I can't remember where I was going with that, but it has to do with, like how energetically it's like suddenly the perception flips and you realize that you're not really separate from the reality around you. Like just like you had bent a finger, the spoon sort of folds and gives way. This idea of like in the Matrix movie, when he goes to the Oracle and the Oracle says there is no spoon, that realization that Neo has is that the information of who he thinks he is as an individual isn't separate from the Matrix as a whole. And that unified field, he's able to be a participant in at a higher level than he thought. That's so interesting, these spoon bending parties and remote viewing parties. I honestly didn't even know that was a thing, but it makes sense that there would be. That's really cool.
It is fun, but it's that group dynamic. It is there's a definite change in the room when something like that happens. And I think it's, we live under these cultural norms, acceptable behavior and that sort of thing. And if you are psychic, you learn to tamper that and not share it with a lot of people. And it can be challenging, I mean, as a kid, if you can see things that you're not supposed to see, I mean, there are not a lot of outlets other than your own journal, I guess, in order to make sense of it. But when you get a bunch of people in the room together or thinking the same way, it's almost like if you ever played in a band, right?
Yeah.
There's a certain chemistry between your musicians, your fellow musicians. You're thinking in sync to a certain degree, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you just kind of know what your bandmate next to you is about ready to play, and I just love it. I think it's I play a little bit of guitar, and I love the feeling of joining together with other people to do things, and I think that also applies to psychic stuff too, or C5 or wherever you've got a group that is setting its intentions on things to come up with something. I think you can bend the rules that we normally live by, and that's what happens, I think, when you're seeing poltergeists in places where UFOs are visited or are being seen, because people are willing to let that data in or let that experience take place when ordinarily they might not be.
That makes sense. I love the analogy of the band, because really when you're like, let's say you're trying to play the drums or the guitar, or especially play the guitar and sing at the same time, not only do you have to really let go at a phenomenal level of what you're doing, if you start to try and get really analytical of every single hit of the drums, the whole thing falls apart. You have to completely let go, like we go back to that lens or that aperture into that flow state. And then not only that, join into kind of a vibratory harmony with the other vibe going on around you. And then pretty soon you're jamming. And so what's interesting is this idea with your remote viewing is you're kind of jamming with the music of the universe. And then if you're make contact, maybe you're sort of like are vibing and putting some music out there, and something else picks up that beat and wants to join in with you, and you start picking up each other's music. And it might not be in English, but it's some sort of a phenomenon or extraterrestrial contact or probing into a target where you're not at. And so very interesting how it's the same with sports. You get in that flow state at an energetic level, and suddenly you're on fire and you're swishing free throws or 3-pointers, and you don't even really feel in control of your body. And it's something that we reward in society. Like, people who are able to achieve that flow state are like the most talented athletic people or artists that we know of. They're the best singers, the best musicians, and
they were probably make very good remote viewers too, to be honest.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So there's a good point brought up in the comments section by Gene Saker. I'm going to see if I can pull it up here. It talks about how you have to establish verifiable accuracy as a viewer with credible instructors and programs on feedbackable targets before you'll be taken seriously. And I agree with that. So let's say, for example, here, Mark, hypothetically, like if we were going to start our own show on YouTube where you and I were going to say, okay, we're going to go treasure hunting. We're going to find the Ark of the Covenant or lost gold or different things. And we have a catalog of like 1,000 different possible targets. How could we conduct this so that everybody that watched the show would be convinced of the validity of it at a higher way than they understand remote viewing to be today? So what would you recommend with that?
Well, Gene has a very good point to start with, that you really kind of need to close that feedback loop for remote viewing to be considered legit. So you can work esoteric targets like aliens or Mars or whatever, but if you don't have feedback that sort of shows you that you were there, then it is challenging to. I mean, it's very interesting, but it doesn't actually prove anything. So like Ingo remote viewed. I believe it was Jupiter, I think, or Saturn. Well, Saturn has rings, right? He was able to determine that Jupiter has rings. And that came through his session before we'd sent out the Voyager probes that it actually confirmed it. Like a year.
Yeah, he drew pictures of Saturn with rings before anybody knew.
We know Saturn has rings, right? That's the one that's visible. But I think it was Jupiter that was surprisingly, it had rings, very subtle rings, but rings all the same. So
right.
But nobody had known that before, and it was an esoteric target until the feedback came back that Voyager had detected rings. So and anybody in the chat that might have further details about that. If I made any mistakes, please correct me. I believe it was Jupiter, but Ingo, it was an esoteric target up until that point. So where was I going with all this? What was your actual question?
Basically, like if we were going to do like a YouTube show or something like that, how could we do it like in a valid way to like not only convince people that we weren't like planning the remote viewing sessions and faking the drawings, but like what would you recommend how to do that? So that
there are a number of groups out there now that are doing predictions, for instance, who are kind of looking into the near future and coming up with things they think might happen within the next month. That gives some credibility if you are posting these videos. This is a great thing about YouTube, because you can post the videos up there. You get a timestamp from when the video was put up there. And then later on, if we get close to the time that a particular event or something happens, you can go back and say, well, that was actually posted to YouTube a month ahead of when it actually happened. So, I mean, it's hard to argue with results like that as long as you trust those timestamps on YouTube, right? So I think that just the fact that you are willing to put stuff out there ahead of time, for instance, would be a great testament to its validity, as far as this, we couldn't have known this ahead of time. Now when you're doing like searching targets like treasure hunts or something like that, people would just kind of have to take your word that you weren't somehow front loaded on it, or you didn't have some kind of advanced data. There are a lot of really interesting esoteric targets that nobody might know about, and it would be hard to argue that you had come up with that information without using remote viewing. Maybe there's like a ship that sunk, the Spanish galleon, with a cargo full of gold that had somehow not ever been recorded. There might be something out there under the water that nobody knows about, and all the witnesses died or whatever, and you might be the only one who could find that using remote viewing, and it would be tough to argue with that if you said dig here and you found the gold, right? I mean, so there are a couple ways, and for me, I don't ever want to try to convince people that remote viewing is real without having them try it themselves, because you can hear me talk about it on and on and on, but until you sit down and you work a target and for a fact that you got that data and you weren't supposed to get that data, then it's just talk, right? It won't be real to you. So
yeah. So people who may think that they might have this intuitive ability, or they're interested or fascinated after watching this show, first of all, what books do you recommend? Where do you recommend sending people to go get started in learning as well? And then we need to find out what the heck is in your brown paper bag.
That's right. We got pretty bad. Have you seen any guesses come across the chat window? Anybody?
I haven't seen any guesses come across. A couple of people have said they think that they might know, but it will be interesting. Anybody that watches this even later on will have to watch to the end and not cheat.
Well, yeah, when you're doing a session, if you don't write it down, it doesn't count. Okay, so
right.
if you've got guesses, put them in now in the chat window. Let's go ahead and let anybody else can see what you got. And I don't see guesses. Like, write your impressions. Don't just guess, but write your impressions.
So if you're in the chat right now, for those of you, it looks like there's 20 people lurking and watching right now. If you saw the paper bag at the beginning, what do you think was inside the paper bag? Your first.
Because after I show it to you, it doesn't count. All right.
It doesn't count, right?
So
I'm willing to be totally embarrassingly wrong. In fact, I plan on recording sessions and stuff like that and trying it. So that'd be really cool.
So if you're interested in learning remote viewing, as I was saying on the UCR show the other day, it belongs to you. It was paid for by your tax dollars. It is in the public domain, and anybody can find resources online for free to learn how to do it. Now, as I mentioned, you will never be good unless you are willing to practice, and you have to practice. to learn how your mind works and to let go of some of that fear and let go of some of that steering that you might be trying to do. You can go to the website of the International Remote Viewing Association. That's irva.org. And it has a number of resources there to get you started. So if you go to irva.org, you can find example remote viewing sessions that you can try, some cool exercises, so you can learn a little bit about how to do it.
Somebody in the comment just wrote what I guessed too, what I thought the impression was too. So there's two that were the same, mine and somebody in the comment. Sorry.
Okay, all right. Well, it must be interesting, Carl, because you are grinning quite a bit there. So we will see. We will see.
So yeah, on that website now, Daz shared a website. Is this the one now where it will actually spit up like numbers for you?
Yes, you can do example targets there. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so yeah, so it'll actually give you a blind target with the digits that you can write down and do the intuitive drawing and practice, and then click to check yourself to see how accurate you were and validate this for yourself.
Right. And if you got somebody at home that can practice with you, they can put something in a bag that you're not aware of and you can try guessing it. Or, I mean, there are various ways to do it. It's remote viewing if you are blind to whatever it is you're trying to figure out. That's really a simple way of doing remote viewing.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so Jeff, let's see. Jeff has got he put a cactus and then said
interesting.
Second guess was a rodent. And then this one, Matt said the first impression they got immediately was an orange, but then was almost positive that was an AOL. And that's what's funny, because that's what I wrote down was if I smelled a fresh orange and got the sensation of like a weight rolling like a sphere. So I don't know. That's what I wrote down. So, so maybe I was just like psychically connected with Matt over there.
Maybe you're hungry. I don't know.
Maybe I was hungry. Right now? I don't know. Let's see. It looks like Chell says deck of cards. Tina says hi. Gene said advanced visual was a harmonica. Interesting. Okay, so those are some of the guesses that we got coming back in. So this will be really interesting to find out what was in the bag.
All right. Well, one other thing I want to say, my friend Tunde wrote a book called Remote Viewing UFOs and the Visitors. And this is a series of taskings that he gave to Joe Mcmonagle on famous UFO cases. And if you want to find out what Joe's one of the best remote viewers in the world. If you want to find out what Joe Mcmonagle says about some of these famous cases, get this book, and you would be surprised. Some of the cases that I thought I was familiar with had some very different remote viewing results. So it's called Remote Viewing UFOs and the Visitors, and it's by Tunde Atun Rossi. I honestly don't know how to pronounce his last name, but there you go. It's available online at Amazon, and a very interesting book if you are learning what remote viewing has to say about some of these interesting phenomena. So, another good book is Daz Smith's, CRV, Controlled Remote Viewing. This is partially made up by the Army's official CRV manual, which I think Paul Smith wrote and is now in the public domain. But it also includes some details about how some of these stages in CRV actually are supposed to work. So get Daz's book, Daz Smith, CRV, Controlled Remote Viewing Manual, and that can help get you started if you want to really learn how the Army did it.
Very cool. Yeah, and Daz is active doing remote viewing live chats and web conferences, and he films and does live remote viewing and uploads the sessions, and the Farsight Institute does a bunch of that. There's a lot of stuff on YouTube for people interested in it to go get involved as well. One last question from Matt asks, remote viewing is obviously remote, but does it work through time? Here's this aspect of time coming up again.
Yes, it does. Absolutely. Time doesn't work the way most people think, and events that happened in the past in some way are still happening, and those people are still around, and you can actually use remote viewing to connect with those events and connect with those people. If you read some books on remote viewing and you learn a little bit about bilocation, that is a very interesting topic, where the remote viewer gets so engrossed in the data that they're getting from the site that they suddenly are there at the site and they perceive actually being there. So if you have a remote viewing target of some famous event like Custer's Last Stand or something, for instance, you're getting data and all of a sudden you're no longer in the room writing down your impressions. You are actually there watching the arrows fly and the bullets fly. And it is just like you were there, very much like a lucid dream, but you're there. And so you can experience these historical events just like they were happening right in front of you. In a lot of cases, that's essentially what is happening. So it's very interesting. And I can give you a lot more references for stories from other people on how this has happened. It's never happened to me. I'm still early in my training, but I've talked with several remote viewers who have interacted with historical figures just like they were right next to them.
That's amazing.
Blows
Yeah,
my mind.
the bilocation thing, it seems so much like similar, and it echoes back to kind of like that Monroe Institute and the out of body type of training. And I wonder how much of that is all connected with the idea of, they were using hemisync and binaural stuff and audio frequencies, even in the room, bathing the room with it, and to try and trigger out of body sort of experiences, which you would call out of body. This is where it gets limiting in the words. You call it out of body, but really you're still alive. Your body's still there, sitting in the chair, even capable of talking or drawing. But it does sometimes feel like you're superimposed or superpositioned in another spot or in another place in time in the past or present. It's so fascinating. And the idea that you can interact and ask questions almost like an interview throughout time with the consciousness of that individual or entity really blows my mind.
Yeah, I was reading in the URVA magazine Aperture. I think it's their 2014 edition. Tom McNair was being interviewed, and he talked about how he had done a session, and all of a sudden Ulysses S. Grant is standing next to him in the room.
Yeah.
Ulysses S. Grant right there in the room next to him. And I don't remember what Tom actually did. He was doing some sort of session, obviously involving him, but he could have interacted with the general there, just like he was alive. So that, if you think about those kind of cases, and then you realize that, well, that's not supposed to happen, because our traditional view of time is that when something is done, it's done, and you can't reach it, but you absolutely can with remote viewing. It'll blow your mind.
Even the concept of the individuality and the where you're sitting in your chair as a soul is really fascinating, because you hear these reports as well where almost the person finds himself bilocated to a degree where they're almost experiencing it as the person or as the target, looking down and seeing their own hands and experiencing maybe even being murdered violently or something like that as the victim experienced it. And that's how they get the perspective of the target. It's fascinating. And so it calls to some ethical responsibility and conversation. And I think that's the thing that gets me, is that so many people toss this subject to the side because they're either afraid it has something to do that might be evil or dark, or it's going to attract something dark to them. And then when it gets treated like, oh, we're gonna remote view the Bitcoin prices, or we're gonna remote view these fun things, people almost react like you're being sacrilegious or blaspheming something sacred, or like you're meddling with something, like playing with a nuclear weapon or something. And as we wrap up with this, what do you have to say about all of that? Because I love it. I feel like an explorer and adventurer of it.
If you've got a skill, our world says that you should be able to make a living using that skill, right? And especially if you put in time and effort to learn something like remote viewing, which, as I said, can put you out in a vulnerable position. You really have to be open to things that you might not have been open to before. I personally don't see any problem with using that skill to make a living, right? If you can do it, that's fine. If you want to remote view the lottery numbers, go for it, And actually, if you think about it, if word got out that somebody used remote viewing to win the lottery, don't you think that more people might be interested in learning remote viewing? Personally, I think so, right?
You know,
And
what would
so-
happen is things like gambling would go away.
yeah, I've got lots of stories. You'll have to invite me back. I'll tell you a little bit about. There's a group of remote viewers that meet in Las Vegas on a regular basis,
Dude,
and they place wages based on their remote viewing sessions. I've done it before. It is a blast.
I need to meet these friends. So yeah, we need to hang out next time you guys go to Vegas and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
Mark, I need to have you back on the show because I really want to talk. Maybe next time I have you back on about bilocation and some of these crazy experiences. And before we go, we have to find out what's in the paper sack, everybody. So
All right.
we have a bunch of
All right,
guesses out there. Let's
pencils
find out.
down. This
Pencils
is the moment
down.
of truth.
Here we go. We're gonna find out what's
Here's
in the
what
bag.
is in the bag. Your remote viewing target, and this is your feedback.
Oh my gosh, a pair of handcuffs.
Handcuffs. Who got handcuffs? Anybody?
Well, I did get the round shape a little bit, I guess, with the
I know
cuff.
Gene
but-
had a view of like a harmonica. It's metal. I mean, maybe I don't know. You can't really play tunes on these, but
I've never, I worked in kind of a juvenile prison for 5 years, and there was oranges at every meal. I swear. No, I don't know. That's a stretch to try and, but yeah. So I got a total miss there with a round orange. Two of us did, but you never know.
there's some round to it, right? A little bit, but maybe not orange. So
That's right. So it's super fun to try out and to check it out. Everybody should go look on the website to try out remote viewing for yourself. Be willing to get it wrong. Open up your mind. If anything, learn meditation and mindfulness. Mark, if everybody wants to check you out and follow you and see where you're going to be showing up out on the internet, where can everybody find you?
follow me at on Twitter at Mark Turner ETC. I also have a YouTube channel I'm starting up at Mark Turner ETC, and my website's markturner.net. So
Nice. Thanks so much, Mark, for joining us, and we'll have to have you back.
yeah, it's been fun. Thank you so much, Carl. Enjoyed it.
Thanks so much.